Farmer buys sick cow out of pity, unknowingly uncovering a secret. Sarah Miller held the envelope with the latest bank notices tightly as she watched the auctioneer present the animals. Sunrise Farm, a 3-generation family inheritance, was about to be seized by creditors in less than 2 months if she didn't find a financial miracle. Next lot, a 5-year-old dairy cow, unregistered. Animal is in poor health, sold as is, announced the auctioneer in a monotone voice, while a ranch hand led out a thin, white and brown spotted cow with a melancholy look in her large eyes. Sarah noticed something about the animal that caught her attention. The cow limped slightly, her ribs visible beneath her dull coat, but her brown eyes seemed to follow the movements around her with unexpected awareness. On the cow's right flank was a strange mark, almost like a geometric shape that didn't resemble a normal cattle brand. Starting at $300? Anyone offering $300 for this animal? The auctioneer barely hid his discomfort. No hands went up in the crowded barn. $200 then. The farmers exchanged glances, some chuckling quietly. No one would bet on a cow clearly on her last legs. An awkward silence settled in, and the auctioneer was about to dismiss the animal when Sarah, moved by something she didn't quite understand, raised her hand. $200, she said firmly. The auctioneer nearly dropped his hammer in surprise. $200 from Miss Miller. Any higher bids? The murmurs grew louder. Everyone there knew the dire state of Sunrise Farm. Seeing the farm's Harris already on the brink of bankruptcy, spending her last savings on a sick animal was, at the very least, unwise. $200 once, $200 twice. The auctioneer looked around hopefully, as if waiting for someone to save Sarah from her own decision. Sold for $200. As she signed the transfer papers, a tall man, in his 50s, his skin weathered by the sun, and a graying mustache, approached her. Richard Thompson owned the largest ranch in the area, Starlight Ranch, which bordered the Miller family's land. An interesting purchase, Sarah, he remarked, eyeing the cow with a calculating look. But you know this animal won't last the week, right? Her milk isn't even good anymore. That's my business, Mr. Thompson, she replied, not hiding her dislike. Stubborn, just like your grandmother, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. If you need help with Sunrise, my offer still stands. Your land is worth more in my hands than in a bank's. Sarah ignored him, calling over Tom, her only remaining employee who had stayed loyal to the farm despite unpaid wages, to help with the animal. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. The trip back to Sunrise Farm was slow. The cow could barely walk, forcing Tom to stop several times along the way. Sarah drove the old pickup truck with the trailer attached, trying to avoid potholes on the dirt road to keep the animal from being jostled too much. I don't mean to be pessimistic, Miss Sarah, but Mr. Thompson might be right, Tom said, adjusting his faded straw hat. This animal doesn't look good at all. At least she'll have a decent place to spend her last days, Sarah replied, glancing in the rearview mirror. I couldn't let her be sold for slaughter in this state. Tom shook his head, admiring his boss's kindness but worried about the money spent. At 32, Sarah Miller was known in New Hope for her stubbornness and soft spot for animals. Since her father had passed away 3 years earlier, leaving the farm drowning in debt, the young woman had fought to preserve her family's legacy. Single and reserved, she had few friends in town, preferring the company of animals and childhood memories on the farm. When they finally arrived, the sun was already setting behind the hills surrounding the valley where Sunrise Farm stretched out. Despite partial neglect, the place still held its rustic charm. A large white-painted wood and brick house with blue windows, surrounded by century-old jaboticaba trees. 2 barns in need of repair, empty paddocks, and pastures that once flourished, now, reduced to just a few animals, painted a sad portrait of a property that had once been one of the most prosperous in the region. Sarah and Tom led the cow to the main barn, where she would be separated from the other few animals to prevent the spread of any illness. When Sarah turned on the dim barn light, she got a better look at the animal. Its coat was tangled and dirty, its legs bearing untreated wounds, but what caught her attention again was that strange mark on its right flank. It wasn't an ordinary farm brand. It looked like a geometric symbol, a circle with lines intersecting at the center. "I've never seen a mark like that," Tom remarked, also noticing the symbol. "It's not a brand from any farm I know." "I'll call Dr. James first thing tomorrow to examine her," Sarah decided. "For now, let's let her rest and eat something." Sarah prepared a special feed mixture with some basic medications she kept for emergencies, then set out fresh water and clean hay for the animal. Before leaving, she stood for a few minutes just watching the cow, who seemed to study her with big brown eyes. "You're going to be okay," Sarah murmured, stroking the animal's muzzle. To her surprise, the cow leaned its head into her hand, almost like a dog seeking affection. "I'll call you Hope. It's what we need most around here." The next morning, Sarah woke before sunrise, as was her habit. She brewed strong coffee, put on her faded work clothes, jeans, worn boots, and a plaid shirt, and went straight to the barn to check on the new resident. To her surprise, Hope was on her feet eating hay with an appetite. When Sarah entered, the cow lifted her head and walked toward her, still limping, but with a vigor she hadn't shown the day before. "Hey there, girl. Feeling better?" Sarah smiled, examining the animal. The wounds on her legs were still there, along with concerning thinness, but there was a new brightness in the cow's eyes. Tom arrived shortly after, equally surprised by the animal's improvement. "This one's tougher than she looks," he said, "but she still needs a vet." Dr. James Wilson arrived at the farm around 9 in the morning. A man in his 60s with graying hair and a kind expression, he had been the local vet for over 3 decades and a friend of the Miller family since before Sarah was born. "So this is the cow you rescued from the auction?" he asked, adjusting his glasses to get a better look. "Folks in town won't stop talking about it. They say you threw away your last bit of money." "What I do with my money is my business," Sarah replied, crossing her arms. The vet smiled. "Just like your grandmother, Mrs. Elizabeth also put animals above financial sense." At the mention of Sarah's grandmother, both fell silent for a moment. Elizabeth Miller had been a legend in the area, a pioneer in dairy farming techniques, stubborn and independent at a time when women rarely ran farms. She had passed away when Sarah was just 15, but her legacy lived on in the stories and, most of all, in the breeding methods she had developed. Dr. James examined Hope thoroughly, listening to her heart, checking her temperature, eyes, mouth, and overall condition. When he reached the mark on the animal's flank, he frowned. "What kind of strange symbol is this? It doesn't look like a regular brand." "That's what I thought," Sarah agreed. "Have you ever seen anything like it?" The veterinarian ran, his fingers over the symbol, thoughtful. "It looks more like a drawing than an identification mark, almost like—" He stopped suddenly, looking at Sarah with a strange expression. "What is it?" she asked. "Nothing, just—" He hesitated. "I remembered something, but I must be mistaken. It was a long time ago." Dr. James continued the exam, collected blood samples, and finished his notes. "So, what's the diagnosis? Will she survive?" Sarah asked anxiously. "To be honest, I'm surprised. From her appearance, I expected to find several serious issues, but her vitals are relatively good. She's malnourished, has some superficial infections in her hooves, and a mild lung inflammation, but nothing that proper care and medication can't fix." "So she's not dying?" Sarah couldn't hide the relief in her voice. "Not immediately," he replied, packing his instruments, "but she needs care. I'll leave antibiotics and vitamins. With proper feeding, she can recover well." "What about the milk? Can she still produce?" "Hard to say. Let's treat her first, then we'll see." "But I wouldn't get my hopes up, Sarah. Even if she recovers, I doubt the yield will be significant." After the vet left, promising to return in a few days, Sarah made sure to administer the medication and prepare a fortified feed for Hope. As she worked, she spoke to the cow as if it could understand her. "Seems you fooled me, didn't you? You're not as bad off as you looked. That's good, really good." To her surprise, the cow followed her around the barn, attentive to every move. When Sarah sat on a hay bale to rest, Hope approached and laid her heavy head in her lap like a giant dog. "That's odd," Tom remarked, watching from the barn entrance. "Never seen a cow act like that." "She's just being grateful," Sarah replied, stroking the animal's coarse coat. "She knows we saved her. Maybe. Or maybe there's something special about her." Tom shrugged. Either way, that doesn't pay the bills. The financial reality weighed heavily on Sarah again. The bank had given an ultimatum. Either she paid at least 30% of the accumulated debt within 60 days, or they would begin foreclosure proceedings. Sunrise Farm, which had belonged to the Millers since 1930, would pass into other hands. As she walked back to the house, Sarah felt the weight of her worries grow. The farm was already operating at bare minimum, just her and Tom managing everything, selling the little milk the other 5 cows produced to the local cooperative, along with eggs from the remaining chickens and vegetables from the small garden she kept. None of it would be enough to save the property. The big house, once full of life, now echoed with emptiness. Since her father's passing and her mother's decision to move to the city to live with her sister, Sarah had lived there alone. The photographs on the walls told the story of better times. Her grandfather standing proudly beside the region's first tractor, her grandmother Elizabeth receiving an award for her innovative management techniques, her young parents smiling on their wedding day, Sarah as a child riding her first pony. They were memories of a prosperity that now seemed irretrievable. Sarah's father, though he had loved the farm deeply, hadn't inherited Elizabeth's business sense. Poorly calculated loans, misguided investments, and a few lost harvests due to severe weather conditions had brought Sunrise Farm to the brink of financial collapse. When he suddenly passed away from a heart attack, Sarah discovered the gravity of the situation. Her thoughts were interrupted by the shrill ring of the landline, one of the few luxuries she still maintained. "Hello?" "Sarah, it's Daisy." From the cooperative, Daisy Roberts was the manager of the New Hope Dairy Cooperative, where Sarah delivered her modest production. "Hi, Daisy. Is there something wrong with the last delivery?" "No, everything's fine. Actually, I'm calling because Richard Thompson stopped by earlier, asking about the cow you bought at the auction." Sarah felt a shiver of irritation. "And what did you tell him?" "Just that I didn't know anything, of course. But I thought his interest was strange, you know. He seemed insistent." "Thompson has always been nosy about other people's business," Sarah replied, trying to sound casual. "Especially mine. I just thought you should know. He mentioned something about that cow originally belonging to one of his employees who sold it without permission. Said there might be issues with the paperwork." "That's a lie," Sarah said firmly. "I bought it legally at the municipal auction with all the documents in order. If he wanted the cow, he should have bid like anyone else." After hanging up, Sarah grew thoughtful. Why would Richard Thompson be interested in a seemingly sick and worthless cow? He who owned hundreds of heads of high-quality cattle. The obvious answer was that he was just stirring trouble, as he always had since he started pressuring the Millers to sell Sunrise Farm's land. The Thompson family's Starlight Ranch bordered Sarah's property on 3 sides, and Richard had never hidden his desire to annex that land to his own. But something about his specific interest in the cow unsettled Sarah. Determined to understand better, she returned to the stable to examine the strange mark on Hope's flank once more. In the afternoon light, the symbol looked even more peculiar. Fair circle with inner lines forming a sort of star or geometric flower. It definitely wasn't a typical ranch brand used to identify ownership. It was something deliberately drawn, almost artistic. As Sarah ran her fingers over the symbol, she felt a different texture in the fur. It wasn't a scar from a hot iron, like conventional brands. It seemed more like the fur had grown naturally in that pattern, with different colors. "What mystery do you carry, Hope?" she murmured, stroking the animal's neck. In the days that followed, the cow continued to recover at a surprising pace. The wounds on her legs healed quickly, her coat began to shine, and her appetite was voracious. The unusual behavior persisted. Hope followed Sarah everywhere, responded when called by name, and seemed to understand simple commands, more like a dog than an ordinary dairy cow. A week after the purchase, when Dr. James returned for a follow-up visit, he couldn't hide his astonishment. "Incredible!" he exclaimed, finishing the examination. "I've never seen such a fast recovery. Have you been following the treatment instructions?" To the letter, Sarah replied. But I also think she had more will to live than she let on. The vet was jotting down his notes when Hope walked up to Sarah and rubbed her head against her shoulder, nearly knocking her over. My goodness, James laughed, adjusting his glasses. In 40 years of practice, I've never seen a bovine act like this. It's like she's attached herself to you. She follows me everywhere, Sarah confirmed. The other day she even tried to walk into the kitchen when I left the door open. Doctor... James suddenly grew serious. Sarah, are you sure you don't know where this cow came from before the auction? No. The papers only list the last owner, someone named Samuel Foster, who I don't know. Why? The veterinarian hesitated. It's probably nothing, but this mark, this behavior, it reminds me of something your grandmother used to do. What do you mean? Sarah stepped closer, intrigued. Elizabeth had theories about genetic and behavioral selection in dairy cattle. She believed she could create lineages with specific traits, not just for production, but for temperament. He smiled at the memory. Everyone thought it was your grandmother's madness, but she was too stubborn to care about criticism. And what does that have to do with Hope? Maybe nothing, but your grandmother used to mark animals from lineages she considered promising in a special way, not with a hot iron, but with her own method that made the hair grow in patterns. It was like her signature. A shiver ran down Sarah's spine. Are you suggesting Hope could be descended from my grandmother's herd? It's a long shot, he admitted. Most of Elizabeth's special herd was sold after the land was divided, when your father took over the farm. But it would be an interesting coincidence. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. Dr. James's words echoed in her mind. She only had scattered memories of her grandmother and her work. She'd been so young when Elizabeth passed. She knew her grandmother had been a pioneer, even controversial in her techniques, but the details had faded with time. Determined to learn more, Sarah went up to the attic, where boxes of family keepsakes were stored. She spent hours sifting through old documents, yellowed photographs, and dusty notebooks. In a box labeled Elizabeth Personal, she found several diaries, some local newspaper clippings about awards her grandmother had won, and photos of the herd. In one photo, dated 1985, Elizabeth stood beside a cow with a mark on its flank nearly identical to Hope's. The handwritten caption read, "Star and her first calf, Dawn lineage successfully established." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers so much. Now, back to the story. Sarah's heart raced. There was a connection. Flipping through one of the diaries, she found mentions of the Dawn lineage, described as cattle with superior dairy aptitude and distinct behavior. Elizabeth wrote about specific feeding techniques, selective breeding, and even behavioral imprinting methods to create cows that responded to simple commands. In one entry, Elizabeth described her special mark. The Dawn symbol, as I've named it, is my genetic signature. It's not just a brand, it's a symbol of what these creatures represent, the perfect union of productivity and docility, the light of a new dawn in cattle farming. It was late when Sarah finally came down from the attic, carrying a box of her grandmother's diaries and documents. Her mind buzzed with questions. If Hope really was part of Elizabeth's special lineage, how had she ended up at the auction? And why was Richard Thompson interested in her? The next morning, Sarah went to the barn early. She looked at Hope, with new eyes now understanding what the symbol meant. It wasn't just any mark, but the emblem of Elizabeth Miller's Dawn lineage. "You're a family heirloom," she murmured to the cow, who answered with a soft moo. "But how did you survive all this time without being recognized?" That day, Sarah decided to test some of the techniques described in her grandmother's diaries. According to Elizabeth, the cows from the Dawn lineage responded to a specific whistle, used as a call signal. It was a method she had developed inspired by the communication between shepherds and herding dogs. To her surprise, when she reproduced the whistle described in the diary, Hope immediately lifted her head and walked toward her, as if recognizing the signal. Sarah tried other commands mentioned in her grandmother's writings, and with each successful test, her conviction grew that Hope was truly a descendant of the special herd. "Unbelievable," Tom remarked, watching Sarah guide the cow across the pasture, using only whistles and verbal commands. with no need for ropes or fences. She acts more like a dog than a cow. It's not ordinary training, Sarah explained, excitedly. It's genetic. My grandmother developed this lineage for decades. And what does that mean for us, practically speaking? Tom asked, ever the pragmatist. Sarah's enthusiasm dimmed slightly. I'm not entirely sure. The diaries mention superior milk production and medicinal properties, but medicinal properties in the milk? Yes, something about a unique composition, higher levels of certain nutrients, health benefits. My grandmother was conducting research on it when she passed away. Tom scratched his chin thoughtfully. If that's true, Miss Sarah, it could be worth a fortune. These days, specialty products like that have a guaranteed market. A flicker of hope ignited in Sarah's heart. Could hope be the key to saving Sunrise Farm? But first, she needed to confirm whether the milk truly had the special properties mentioned in the diaries. Hope wasn't producing milk yet. She still needed to fully recover and ideally have a calf. But that would take time, and the bank's deadline was approaching relentlessly. That afternoon, as Sarah studied her grandmother's diaries for more information, she heard the sound of a car approaching. Through the window, she recognized Richard Thompson's pickup truck pulling into the farmyard. With an irritated sigh, she went to greet him on the porch. Richard stepped out of the vehicle with a false smile on his tanned face. Good afternoon, Sarah. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. What brings you here, Mr. Thompson? Sarah was direct, not returning the smile. Always so hospitable. He laughed, climbing the porch steps. I came to talk business, as usual. I have nothing to negotiate with you. Richard ignored the hostility, leaning casually against the porch column. I heard you bought a cow at last week's auction, a sick animal from what I've been told. And it occurred to me that you might have wasted your money. I'm here to offer help. I'll buy the animal from you for, let's say, $500, more than double what you paid. Sarah crossed her arms, suspicious. Why the interest in a sick cow, Mr. Thompson? Let's just say I have an animal rehabilitation project at Starlight Ranch, he shrugged. Part of our social responsibility. Since when do you care about animal welfare? Sarah couldn't hide the sarcasm. Your management practices are known for prioritizing profit above all else. Richard's smile faltered slightly. People change, Sarah. Either way, it's a generous offer. You need the money more than a cow that probably won't give you any return. Thank you, but I'm not interested in selling. The man's expression hardened. You're as stubborn as your grandmother. Elizabeth also never knew a good offer when she saw one. The mention of her grandmother put Sarah on alert. You knew my grandmother well? Better than you think, he replied with an odd tone. We had business disagreements in the past. A shame she was so uncompromising in her positions. Something in his tone made Sarah feel there was more to this story than simple business disagreements. Like I said, I'm not selling the cow, if that's all. Think carefully, Sarah, Richard insisted, his voice now sharper. My offer won't stand forever, and you know the bank won't wait much longer. Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson. Sarah ended the conversation, turning to go inside. $1,000, he called after her. My final offer. Think about it. After Richard left, Sarah grew uneasy. His sudden, insistent interest in the cow couldn't be a coincidence, especially now that she suspected Hope's special origins. He knew something she hadn't yet uncovered. Determined to understand the history of the Dawn lineage and her grandmother's connection to Richard Thompson, Sarah returned to reading the diaries. In an entry from 1987, she found something unsettling. RT tried to buy my research again. Today. Offered a considerable sum, but I refused. He doesn't understand this work isn't just about money, it's about revolutionizing our understanding of cattle management. His veiled threats don't intimidate me, but I fear he won't give up easily. RT could only be Richard Thompson. In later entries, Elizabeth repeatedly mentioned conflicts with him, including a land dispute that forced the sale of part of Sunrise Farm to Starlight Ranch. Dividing the land was a hard blow, but I managed to preserve the core of the Dawn. Heard. RT may have taken the northern pastures, but he won't lay hands on decades of my work. The last mention of Thompson dated just 2 months before Elizabeth's death, was especially troubling. I have reason to believe RT is behind the disappearance of 3 Dawn lineage heifers. The animals vanished overnight, no signs of predators. I've added extra locks to the stables and hired a night watchman. I can't prove anything, but I know his methods. Sarah closed the diary, a mix of anger and worry settling over her. Her grandmother's suspicions suggested Richard Thompson had spent years trying to access the special lineage, possibly even resorting to theft. If Hope truly belonged to that lineage, his interest made perfect sense. But there was still a missing piece. How had the cow ended up at the auction? And who was Samuel Foster, the last registered owner? The next day, Sarah visited the municipal auction office for answers. The small office in downtown New Hope was run by Claude Robinson, a middle-aged man who knew every farmer in the area. Samuel Foster, he repeated when she asked about Hope's former owner. Yes, I remember him. Worked as foreman at Starlight Ranch for years, retired a few months back and moved to Oregon, from what I heard. He worked for Richard Thompson? Sarah felt a chill of confirmation. That's right, but why the interest? And the cow I bought at auction, did it come from him? Claude checked the records. According to this, Samuel turned the animal over 2 days before moving. Said he couldn't take her and didn't want to put her down. Odd he'd care so much about a seemingly worthless animal. Any contact info? A phone number, address? Sorry, Sarah, we only have his old New Hope address, but the place is empty now. Leaving the office, Sarah had more questions than answers. If the cow had belonged to one of Richard Thompson's employees, how had it gotten the Dawn lineage brand? Had Thompson finally gotten his hands on some of Elizabeth's special herd? As she walked through New Hope's town square, someone called her name. It was Daisy from the dairy cooperative. Sarah, so good to see you. I was actually hoping to talk to you. Did something happen, Daisy? Well, yes. Remember when I mentioned Richard Thompson's interest in your cow? Well, yesterday a young woman came to the cooperative asking about the same animal. A young woman? Who? She didn't properly introduce herself. Young, pretty, dark hair. Said she was looking for a cow that had been recently sold at the auction. She even showed a photo. When I told her you had bought the animal, she seemed very relieved but also nervous, asked for your address. And you gave it to her? Sarah asked, alarmed. Of course not. Daisy seemed offended by the suggestion. I told her I couldn't share members' information, but I thought you should know. First Thompson, now this young woman. Had what's so special about that cow? I'm still trying to figure that out myself, Sarah replied thoughtfully. If she shows up again, please let me know. On her way back to the farm, Sarah couldn't stop thinking about the mysterious woman. Who was she and why was she interested in Hope? Another person connected to Richard Thompson, trying to get the animal back for him. When she arrived at Sunrise Farm, Sarah found Tom at the property's entrance, looking worried. Ms. Sarah, there's a young woman waiting for you on the porch. She got here about 20 minutes ago, asking specifically for you and the cow. We bought at the auction. Sarah's heart raced. What does she look like? Young, early 20s, long dark hair, dressed nicely but simply. Wouldn't tell me her name, insisted she needed to speak to you personally. Did you leave her alone out there? She seemed sincere, not threatening. Either way, I locked the barn just in case. Sarah nodded, grateful for Tom's caution. I'll see what she wants. Stay close in case I need help. As she approached the house, Sarah spotted the young woman sitting on the porch steps. She was indeed pretty, with dark hair cascading in waves over her shoulders and delicate features. She wore jeans, a simple blouse, and well-worn riding boots. When she saw Sarah, she stood quickly. Sarah Miller, she asked nervously. Yes, that's me. And you are? My name is Cecilia Foster. I came to talk about the cow you bought at last week's auction. Foster, Sarah repeated, surprised. Are you related to Samuel Foster? I'm his daughter, Cecilia replied, seeming surprised Sarah knew the name. And I need to explain something important about that cow. Sarah hesitated, still wary. Why don't we go inside and talk? In the simple but cozy kitchen, Sarah made coffee while observing Cecilia, who seemed both anxious and relieved to be there. So what do you have to tell me about Hope? Sarah asked, placing 2 mugs on the table. Hope? Cecilia smiled slightly. That's a good name for her. I used to call her Moon because of the crescent-shaped mark on her nose. So the cow really was yours? Mine and my father's, Cecilia confirmed, holding the warm mug with both hands. He didn't want to sell her at the auction, but he had no choice. What do you mean? Cecilia took a deep breath as if gathering her thoughts. My father worked for Richard Thompson for nearly 30 years as foreman at Starlight Ranch. It was a good job most of the time until we found out something we shouldn't have. Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. What did you find out? That Thompson was involved in something illegal with the herd, falsifying pedigree records, altering import documents. Cecilia paused. But the worst was when we discovered the stolen animals. Stolen animals. From several ranches in the area over the years, mostly animals with special traits or high genetic value. Thompson used intermediaries, never got involved directly, but my father found documents, records that proved everything. Sarah felt a chill. And Hope. She was one of the stolen cows, Cecilia confirmed, sorrow in her voice, from a farm called Sunrise many years ago. My father didn't know it at the time. She was just a calf when she showed up at Starlight. Thompson said he'd bought the animal from a breeder in Montana. So Hope really belongs to the Dawn lineage, Sarah exclaimed. To my grandmother's special herd. Cecilia's eyes widened. You're Elizabeth Miller's granddaughter? Yes. How do you know about my grandmother? From the symbol on the cow. After we discovered the truth about Thompson, my father researched the origins of some animals. The symbol on Moon's flank led him to old articles about your grandmother and her research with special cattle. The pieces were starting to come together. Sarah briefly explained her own discovery of her grandmother's diaries and Elizabeth's suspicions about Richard Thompson's involvement in the disappearance of animals. That explains a lot, Cecilia remarked. When we confronted Thompson, he denied everything, of course, threatened to fire my father, sue us for defamation, but then instead he offered a deal, a generous retirement package for my father and enough money for us to move far away if we promised to stay silent. And you accepted? Sarah asked, no judgment in her voice. We didn't have much choice. Cecilia looked down. My father is sick, needs expensive treatments, and Thompson made it clear he could make our lives very difficult if we didn't cooperate. But what about the cow? Why did she end up at the auction? Cecilia took a sip of coffee before answering. That was my fault. I grew attached to Moon since she was little. When I was a teenager, I started taking care of her specifically. I noticed she was different from the other animals, smarter, more responsive. When we found out her true origin, I couldn't bear the thought of leaving her with Thompson. So you hid her? Yes. My father registered her as his personal property, claiming she was part of his payment from years before. Thompson didn't care at the time since Moon never showed the special traits he expected. She didn't produce extraordinary milk, just seemed like a regular cow, though gentle. What Thompson didn't know, Sarah explained, recalling her grandmother's diaries, is that the Dawn lineage needs specific handling to express its true potential. My grandmother developed special feeding and care techniques. That explains it, Cecilia exclaimed. Thompson always complained that the special animals he acquired never lived up to expectations. He didn't have the knowledge to unlock their potential. But I still don't understand why your father sold the cow at auction if you wanted to protect her. Cecilia's face twisted in anguish. I was away, visiting a specialized clinic for my father in Chicago. Thompson found out about Moon, that she was one of the cows he'd been searching for. He confronted my father, demanded the animal back. When I returned, my father had already gotten rid of her, putting her up for auction in poor condition so no one would bid. But why do that instead of just giving the cow back to Thompson? Because my father hoped she wouldn't sell and would return to the municipal shelter. He had a friend there who promised to care for her until I could secretly retrieve her. It was risky, but it was the best plan he could come up with in a hurry. And then I showed up and bought the cow, Sarah finished, now understanding the whole situation. Exactly. Cecilia gave a small smile. When I found out, I was desperate. Thompson is furious, has been pressuring me to find out where Moon is. I mean Hope. He doesn't know yet that she's with you, but it won't take long for him to find out. Sarah Miller fell silent for a few moments, processing everything. The story explained Richard Thompson's unusual interest, his persistent offers, and the distrust she had always felt toward him. Why did you come to me, Cecilia, to take Hope back? Cecilia hesitated. At first, yes. I intended to return the money and explain the situation. But now, she shook her head. Now I realize maybe she's exactly where she should be, with the granddaughter of her true owner on her original farm. But you care about her, Sarah observed. Very much, Cecilia admitted, tears in her eyes. Moon, Hope was my companion for years. I studied veterinary medicine because of her, you know. I always thought there was something special about her. You're a vet? Sarah asked, surprised. I'm in my final year of school. That's why I've been traveling. I was doing an internship in Chicago. An idea began forming in Sarah's mind. Cecilia, I think we need to talk more. I have a proposal for you. That afternoon, Sarah took Cecilia to the stable to see Hope. The cow's reaction upon seeing the young woman was immediate and touching. The animal ran to her, rubbing her head against Cecilia's shoulder and letting out soft moose, as if happy to reunite with an old friend. She missed you, Sarah remarked, moved by the scene. And I missed her, Cecilia replied, hugging the cow's neck as tears streamed down her face. Sarah explained to Cecilia about her financial situation, the bank's ultimatum, and how discovering Hope's true identity had brought a glimmer of hope. If they could recover Elizabeth Miller's knowledge about managing the Dawn lineage and rebuild the special herd, maybe they could save Sunrise Farm. My grandmother's journals have a lot of information, but some parts are incomplete, Sarah explained. With your veterinary knowledge and your experience with Hope, maybe we can fill in the gaps. You want me to help? Cecilia asked, surprised. I want to propose a partnership. You have the knowledge and the bond with Hope. I have the land, my grandmother's journals, and the determination not to let Richard Thompson win. Together, maybe we can not only save Sunrise, but also expose what he's been doing all these years. Cecilia hesitated, clearly tempted by the idea but worried. Thompson is a powerful and vengeful man, Sarah. He has connections all over the region. If we challenge him directly... I'm not suggesting a direct confrontation, at least not yet, Sarah clarified. First, we need to understand the true potential of the Dawn lineage and make sure Hope is safe. Then, with solid proof, we can decide how to proceed. After long conversations, Cecilia agreed to stay for a few days to help Sarah decipher Elizabeth's journals and develop a care plan for Hope. She called her father, explaining where she was and what she had discovered, promising to return soon, to help him with the move to Oregon. In the days that followed, the two women worked tirelessly, comparing notes, studying the journals, and gradually implementing the special feeding and management techniques described by Elizabeth. Cecilia, with her veterinary training, understood technical aspects that eluded Sarah, while Sarah had an intuitive knowledge of the land and family traditions that filled in the theoretical gaps. Tom watched the new partnership with a mix of hope and skepticism. "Do you ladies really believe one cow can save the farm?" he asked one afternoon as he helped them prepare a special herbal mixture mentioned in the journals. "She's not just any cow, Tom," Sarah replied. "It's what she represents. Decades of my grandmother's research, a unique lineage that was stolen from us. And if Cecilia is right about the potential value of the milk with medicinal properties, the market for natural products with proven health benefits is enormous," Cecilia added. "If we can reproduce the results your grandmother documented, we could attract serious investors." After a week of intensive treatment with the special diet described in the journals, Hope began showing visible signs of improvement beyond the initial physical recovery. Her coat gained an unusual shine, her eyes seemed livelier, and her behavior became even more responsive and intelligent. "It's incredible," Cecilia remarked after performing a full checkup on the animal. "Her vital signs are better than ever, and there are indications she might start producing milk soon, even without having had a calf recently." "My grandmother mentioned this in her journals," Sarah exclaimed excitedly. "She called it behavioral stimulated production. The cows from the Dawn lineage could start or maintain lactation through specific handling techniques without needing the traditional reproductive cycle. This is revolutionary, Cecilia admitted. In college, we studied rare cases like this, but always as exceptions, never as something that could be developed systematically. On the 10th day of their partnership, Hope produced her first liters of milk. The appearance was slightly different from regular milk, a bit thicker and with a faintly more yellowish hue, indicating high fat and nutrient content. "We'll need to analyze this in a lab to confirm its properties," Cecilia said. "I know. A professor at the university who could help us discreetly." "How long would it take?" Sarah asked, worried about the bank's deadline, now just 40 days away. "A preliminary analysis, about a week. For more in-depth studies, months. But if we find some of the specific markers mentioned in the journals, we'll already have something concrete to present to potential investors." The plan seemed promising, but it was interrupted the next morning by an unexpected visit. Sarah was in the field with Hope when she saw Richard Thompson's pickup truck approaching, accompanied by another vehicle she didn't recognize. "Cecilia!" she called out, alarmed. "Thompson is coming, and he's not alone." Cecilia rushed to the field, paling at the sight of the vehicles. "That's his lawyer with him," she said, recognizing the second car. "This isn't good." Quickly, the two led Hope to the farthest stable from the house, where Tom was already preparing a hiding spot for her. They barely had time to return to the main house when the vehicles pulled into the yard. Richard Thompson stepped out of his truck, followed by a man in a suit carrying a briefcase. When he saw Cecilia standing beside Sarah on the porch, his expression twisted into barely contained anger. "So this is where you've been hiding," he said, addressing Cecilia. "Your father is worried." "I doubt that," Cecilia replied coldly. "I spoke to him just yesterday." "What do you want here?" Sarah asked, standing firm despite her nerves. The man in the suit stepped forward. "My name is Richard Bennett, Mr. Thompson's lawyer. We're here to settle a matter of ownership." "Ownership," Sarah repeated. "Yes, Miss Miller. It concerns the bovine you acquired at the municipal auction approximately 2 weeks ago." He opened his briefcase, pulling out some documents. "We have reason to believe the animal was taken to auction illegally, without the consent of its true owner, Mr. Thompson." "That's a lie," Cecilia exclaimed. "The cow belonged to my father, who received it as part of his payment years ago. I have documents that prove it." "Documents your father was forced to sign under threats," Cecilia shot back, furious. The lawyer ignored the accusation. "Miss Miller, we have here a formal notice requesting the immediate return of the animal. Otherwise, we will be forced to take legal action, including a potential lawsuit for receiving stolen property." "This is absurd," Sarah replied, trying to stay calm. "I bought the animal legally at a public auction with all the necessary paperwork." "The legality of the auction isn't in question," the lawyer explained. "The issue is the animal's origin before the auction. Mr. Foster had no authority to dispose of it, as it belonged to Starlight Ranch." Sarah and Cecilia exchanged worried glances. It was their word against Richard Thompson's, one of the most influential men in the region. "I'm willing to be reasonable, Sarah," Richard interjected with a smile that didn't hide the threat. In his eyes, "I can pay $1,500 for the animal, 3 times what you spent. It's a generous offer given the circumstances." "And if I refuse?" "Then we proceed with legal action," the lawyer answered promptly. "And I must warn you that, in addition to returning the animal, you may be held liable for legal fees and possible damages. Not to mention," Richard added, "a lawsuit like this could delay any negotiations with the bank about your mortgage. It'd be a shame to lose the farm over a single cow, don't you think?" The threat was clear, and Sarah felt the weight of the situation. She didn't have the money for a drawn-out legal battle, and Thompson knew it, even if she was in the right. He could drag things out long enough to ensure she lost Sunrise Farm to the bank. "I need time to think," she finally said. "You have 48 hours, the lawyer replied, handing her the documents. "After that, we'll take the necessary steps." When the 2 men left, Sarah and Cecilia went inside, disheartened. "He's bluffing," Cecilia said as soon as the door closed. "The documents my father has would prove Thompson is lying." "But where are those documents?" Sarah asked. "With my father in Oregon. He left yesterday as soon as I spoke to him." Was worried Thompson might try something against us. So we have no way to prove anything in the next 48 hours. Not through conventional means, Cecilia admitted, but I know someone who might be able to help. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us newcomers out. Now, back to the story. The person Cecilia was referring to was Dorothy Parker, the former manager of the local bank, retired just a few years ago. Dorothy had worked there for over 3 decades and knew the dealings of practically every established family in the area, including the Millers and the Thompsons. My father always said Mrs. Parker was the only one at the bank who truly tried to help when he sought financing to buy his own land, Cecilia explained. She knows Thompson's methods better than anyone. That afternoon, the 2 young women visited Dorothy at her home in town, a simple but well-kept house with a flower garden out front. The 70-year-old woman, with white hair and an elegant posture, greeted them with curiosity. "Miller?" she repeated after Sarah introduced herself. "You're Elizabeth's granddaughter?" "Yes, ma'am." A smile brightened Dorothy's wrinkled face. "Your grandmother and I were friends, you know. We went to school together. She was always the smartest and bravest of us." Her expression turned melancholic. "What happened to your family's land was a terrible injustice." Seated in the cozy living room, teacups in hand, Sarah and Cecilia explained the situation with hope, the discoveries about the Dawn lineage, and the recent threats from Richard Thompson. Dorothy listened intently, her face hardening at the mention of Thompson. "That man destroys everything he touches," she murmured, "but he always gets away with it because he knows the right people and doesn't hesitate to use shady methods." "Do you think he stands a chance in this dispute over the cow?" asked Sarah. "Legally? Maybe not if you have the right paperwork, but Richard has never played by the rules." Dorothy set her cup down. "The real question is, why are you fighting? For this cow? Is it just sentimental value or is there more?" Sarah hesitated, exchanging glances with Cecilia. Could they fully trust Dorothy? The older woman noticed their hesitation. "You don't have to tell me everything," she said gently, "but I need to understand why this animal is so important to help you properly." Cecilia was the first to speak. "The cow belongs to a special lineage developed by Sarah's grandmother. We believe its milk has valuable medicinal properties that could save Sunrise Farm from foreclosure." Dorothy nodded slowly. "The Dawn lineage," she said, surprising them. "Both. Elizabeth told me about it many times. She even tried to secure funding to expand her research, but the bank never believed in the project's potential." "You knew about it?" Sarah was stunned. "Your grandmother and I weren't just school friends, Sarah. I helped her manage her finances for years. I knew about many of her projects, including the Dawn lineage. In fact..." Dorothy stood and walked to a bookshelf, pulling out an old folder. "I've kept this for years. Maybe now it's found its rightful purpose." The folder contained old documents related to Sunrise Farm, including one that immediately caught Sarah's eye. The original deed for the sale of part of the land to Richard Thompson. "Here," Dorothy pointed to a clause in the contract. Elizabeth insisted on including this provision, even though it seemed irrelevant at the time. She always thought ahead. The clause stated that the land sale did not include any rights to the specialized livestock developed at Sunrise Farm, identified by the Dawn brand, nor to any derivatives, techniques, or products developed from this livestock. "Does this mean..." Sarah began. "It means that even if Thompson acquired some animals from the Dawn lineage, he never obtained the rights to it," Dorothy finished. "Any animal bearing the Dawn brand legally belongs to the Millers, no matter how it ended up in someone else's hands." "Would this protect us legally?" asked Cecilia. "It's a strong argument," Dorothy admitted. "But knowing Richard, he'll find ways around it, delay the process, pressure you. We need something more direct, something that makes him back down immediately." Dorothy thought for a moment, sifting through the documents. "There's something else you should know about Richard Thompson and the expansion of Starlight Ranch. Not all his acquisitions were as legal as he'd like people to believe." The older woman pulled another document from the folder, an old map of the region with handwritten notes. "This map shows the original property lines before Thompson started expanding his ranch. If we compare it to the current boundaries..." She laid a newer map over it. Do you see the discrepancy on the eastern border? The area now belonging to Starlight was originally part of the Municipal Forest Reserve. Somehow Thompson managed to alter the records to incorporate nearly 100 acres of the reserve into his property. "That's public land fraud," exclaimed Cecilia. "Exactly. And it's a much more serious crime than any dispute over the ownership of a cow." Dorothy carefully put away the maps. Elizabeth discovered this shortly before she passed away. She was gathering evidence to report Thompson to the authorities. "Do you think—" Sarah hesitated. The implication was too serious to say out loud. Dorothy understood the unspoken question. "I can't say for sure, Sarah. Your grandmother had an accident. At least that's what the investigation concluded. But the timing always seemed convenient for certain people." A heavy silence fell over the room. Finally, Cecilia spoke. "How can we use this information to protect ourselves?" "You won't use it directly," Dorothy replied. "I will. Richard and I have a long history. He knows I've always doubted his methods, but he never had proof that I had compromising information. I'll visit him personally and make it clear that if he continues this pursuit against you, certain documents might find their way to the district attorney's office." "You'd do that for us?" Sarah asked, moved. "For you, for Elizabeth's memory, and for the justice that was never served?" Dorothy smiled. "I'm too old to fear Richard Thompson's threats." The next day, while Sarah and Cecilia continued the special treatment with Hope, collecting and storing milk samples for analysis, Dorothy made her promised visit to Starlight Ranch. She returned in the afternoon with a satisfied smile. "Thompson wasn't at all happy to see me," she reported, gathered with the young women in the kitchen of Sunrise Farm. "But he turned considerably paler when I mentioned the maps of the Municipal Forest Reserve." "And did he agree to—" "Leave us alone?" Cecilia asked eagerly. "Better than that," Dorothy smiled, handing Sarah a document. "He signed a waiver relinquishing any claim over the animal in question, and also—" she handed over another paper, "an acknowledgement of the validity of the clause in the land sale contract protecting the Dawn lineage." Sarah could hardly believe it. "How did you manage this?" "Let's just say that when faced with the possibility of a public scandal and a federal investigation into illegal appropriation of public lands, Richard became surprisingly reasonable." Dorothy winked. "I also made it clear that I have copies of all relevant documents in a safe place, and that any misfortune befalling you or me would result in their immediate release." With Thompson's threat temporarily neutralized, Sarah and Cecilia could focus on developing Hope's potential. In the following weeks, they worked tirelessly, implementing all the techniques described in Elizabeth's journals and monitoring the results. The milk produced by Hope was sent for analysis at the university where Cecilia studied through a trusted professor. The preliminary results confirmed what Elizabeth had documented decades earlier. The milk contained extraordinarily high levels of certain beneficial components, including antioxidants and natural anti-inflammatory compounds. "This is revolutionary," stated Professor Johnson, the animal nutrition specialist who conducted the analyses. "The composition is unique. If these results can be consistently replicated, you have something extremely valuable in your hands." With the preliminary scientific data and the historical documentation from Elizabeth's journals, Sarah and Cecilia prepared a presentation for potential investors. Through Professor Johnson's contacts, they secured a meeting with representatives from a pharmaceutical lab specializing in natural products. "We're asking for an initial investment of $1 million, Sarah explained during the presentation, feeling nervous but determined. "In exchange, we offer a 30% share in the profits from products developed using the milk from the Dawn lineage, while retaining the intellectual property of the management technique and breeding rights for the herd." The lab executives were clearly impressed, both by the scientific data and the story behind the Dawn lineage. After lengthy negotiations and a visit to Sunrise Farm to meet Hope in person, they finally reached an agreement. An initial investment of 850,000 rials, enough to settle the bank debt and begin rebuilding the special herd, in exchange for exclusive product development rights for 5 years and 25% of future profits. On the morning the contract was to be signed, Sarah rose at dawn and went straight to the stable where Hope was housed. The cow, now fully recovered and healthy, immediately approached, rubbing her head against Sarah's shoulder, as had become her habit. "We did it, girl," Sarah murmured, hugging the animal's neck. "You saved Sunrise Farm, you know that? Just like the name I gave you, Hope." Hours later, in the makeshift meeting room in the main house, Sarah, Cecilia, and Dorothy watched as the lab representatives and their lawyers finalized the contract. When the last signature was placed on the paper, a collective sigh of relief filled the room. "Congratulations, ladies," said the lab director, shaking Sarah's and Cecilia's hands. "I believe we're beginning a partnership that will revolutionize the natural products market in the US." That evening, under the starry countryside sky, Sarah, Cecilia, Dorothy, and Tom celebrated with a simple dinner on the porch. The future, which had seemed so bleak just a month before, now shone with possibilities. "Sunrise Farm will rise again, stronger," Sarah declared, raising a toast. "Thanks to a stubborn cow, a brave new friend," she smiled at Cecilia, "and a keeper of ancient secrets," she added, looking at Dorothy. "And thanks to your own determination," Dorothy said. "Elizabeth would be proud, Sarah. You've proven yourself worthy of her legacy." Cecilia, who had initially planned to stay only a few days, decided to accept Sarah's offer of a permanent partnership. With her veterinary training and knowledge of Elizabeth's journals, she would be key to developing the new Dawn lineage herd. Her father, now settled in Oregon to continue his medical treatment, gave his blessing to his daughter's new path. "I always knew you'd find your place, my girl," he said during a video call. "I just never imagined it would be by continuing Elizabeth Miller's legacy." In the months that followed, Sunrise Farm underwent a gradual transformation. With the investment money, Sarah paid off the bank debt, made essential repairs to the facilities, and began a controlled breeding program, using Hope as the primary matriarch. The first calf was born the following spring, a healthy female bearing the same distinctive Dawn lineage mark on her flank. Sarah and Cecilia celebrated the birth as a symbol of the farm's rebirth and the fulfillment of Elizabeth's dream. The lab developed a line of specialty dairy products derived from the Dawn lineage milk, starting with a yogurt aimed at people with chronic inflammatory conditions. The clinical trial results were so promising that proposals soon emerged to expand the line to include products for diabetics and those with common lactose intolerance. Richard Thompson, though keeping his distance as per the agreement, watched Sunrise Farm's growing success with bitterness. His long-standing attempt to acquire that land and control Elizabeth Miller's legacy had been definitively thwarted. On a Sunday afternoon, nearly a year after purchasing Hope at the auction, Sarah was sitting on the porch of the main house watching the herd, now consisting of Hope and 5 young animals from the Dawn lineage. Cecilia joined her, bringing 2 cups of coffee. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, sitting beside her friend and now business partner. "About how a single decision can change everything," Sarah replied, accepting the coffee. "If I hadn't bought Hope that day, if my father hadn't taken the risk to protect her," Cecilia continued, "if your grandmother hadn't been so visionary and persistent," added Dorothy, who had also come to spend the Sunday at the farm and had just joined them on the porch. "Many pieces had to fall into place," Sarah agreed, "almost as if it were fate," Dorothy suggested, with a wise smile. "Or maybe just justice finding its way, even if it took decades." In the distance, Hope lifted her head and looked toward them, as if she knew she was the topic of conversation. Under the golden light of the sunset, the Dawn lineage mark on her flank seemed to glow with its own light, a symbol of the past that had been reborn to build a promising future. The farm, once on the brink of ruin, now pulsed with new life and purpose. And it had all started with an act of compassion for a seemingly worthless cow who held a secret capable of transforming not just Sunrise Farm, but potentially the lives of many people who would benefit from her special products. "I think I've learned an important lesson this past year," Sarah reflected. "Sometimes what seems like just a kind gesture with no practical return can hold the seed of something extraordinary. And sometimes," Cecilia added, "we just need enough faith to water that seed, even when everyone around us doubts anything can grow." Dorothy watched the 2 young women with maternal affection. They had faced adversity, overcome obstacles, and remain true to their values. There could be no better continuation of Elizabeth Miller's legacy. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the reborn fields of Sunrise Farm in gold, Hope and her growing herd grazed peacefully, living symbols that, even in the hardest times, hope and compassion can transform destinies and create new beginnings. End of story. Dear listener, this story shows how compassion and persistence can change our lives in unexpected ways. Share with us what you thought of Sarah and Hope's journey. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and tell us, have you ever performed an act of kindness that brought surprising results?